go. No, no one's there yet.
Oh, there we go.
So welcome to everyone who's coming in. We will start at 7 o'clock. Hi, everyone. We will start in 2 minutes at 7 o'clock. Okay, welcome everyone to what is the midpoint of the 2020 RowOn Virtual Coaching Conference. I hope everyone has been able to take in at least some of the World Rowing Conference session recordings that we've been sent each day for those who are signed up for that. And this is the third of 5 sessions hosted by Row Ontario. And it's been a great week so far, so looking forward to continuing that tonight. Before any further introductions, by way of land acknowledgement, as we come together for this conference, geographically dispersed but brought together virtually, Let's take a few minutes to reflect on the meaning of places, and in so doing, recognize the territories of the different Indigenous peoples of where we live and where we are participating in this conference from today. These lands are home to diverse populations of Indigenous and other peoples. We acknowledge and respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within our communities, wherever we may be. My name is Andrea Miller, and I am the Manager, Coach, and Umpire Pathways for RowOn Ontario. On behalf of RowOn Ontario, I would like to thank our partner, AMP Rowing, as well as RCA and the Coaches Association of Ontario for their support in putting on this event. Before we jump in, I do have a few quick housekeeping things to go over that are on the screen right now. Everyone is muted and your cameras are disabled, just so you know. If you have any issues related to following along with the presentation, you can access the slides through the OneDrive link you were emailed ahead of time. If you have any urgent technical issues, you can use the chat function, the chat box, or you can email me directly at andrea@rowontario.ca, and I will be monitoring both, and I'll do my best to help as we go along. This is a webinar, so there won't be a lot of opportunity for conversation per se, but questions are still certainly welcome and encouraged. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. So not the chat box. The chat box will keep for technical issues and quick things like that. But if you want to ask a question of the two panelists, please use that Q&A box, and they will be monitoring and probably taking most of the questions at the end. I think they'll go over that. And you may ask anonymously tonight if you choose to. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we may not be able to answer all questions, but our panelists will talk about how they can be available afterwards if you want to talk about anything in more detail. We will carefully monitor the chat and Q&A areas, but for the interest of time, we won't be able to unmute participants tonight for any discussion. As well, the session will be recorded, and we will make the session available at the end of the entire conference along with the others. And PD points will be recorded for those who are present and part of tonight's presentation. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists who are here to talk to us about safe sport in the club rowing context. Lisa Roddy is RowOn Ontario's Coast Manager and was an active member of Ontario's Safe Sport Task Force. And Ian Wilson is the head coach of Hanlon Boat Club in Toronto and is an NCCP coach developer in training. And I'm looking forward to a great presentation tonight. Thank you both.
Thank you, Andrea. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. You know, somebody commented it's been a busy week for rowing, especially with the snow. So we have a huge topic, but really what we want to do today is just kind of give you a few things to think about, hopefully spark some ideas, some thoughts, think outside the box, really talk about what safe sport means for you as coaches, less about kind of all the technical pieces in the background, but more about what does it look like, how does it help move you forward, and all of those pieces. Really, we want this to be a conversation between Ian and I that you all get to listen to, and definitely we want to address your questions. Andrea did mention that you can ask questions anonymously. I know sometimes this topic, you know, you don't want to say at my club or whatever. So, you know, feel free to use that. That's fine. We do have a fair good chunk of information because the topic is so huge, and Ian and I both self-admittedly like to talk. So we are going to do our best to get through kind of the information, the slides, and leave enough time for questions at the end. And we're committed to doing our best to answer as many as we can. If not here, perhaps in a follow-up document, we'll just see how it goes and roll with punches. We're both pretty flexible. So without further ado, we're going to get rolling. And I guess bear with us as we talk over each other and keep going. I will say we did ask each other and Andrea to try to make sure that we're staying on time and on just conscious of that. So if you do, you know, we ask Andrea to remind us occasionally if needed. But so kind of to start, just a little bit of background. You know, why are we talking about safe sport? Why is it all of a sudden huge? It's always been part of the sport culture. but why now it seems to be kind of front in our face. About 18 months ago, way back in 2019, before all the 2020 craziness hit, CBC did a huge investigation about what does the sport landscape look like in Canada. And unfortunately, they uncovered a story that no one in sport really enjoys to talk about or hear about. Over 36 sports, hundreds of victims, hundreds of coaches charged. It was not a pretty day for sport in Canada as all of this was revealed. And so the government, through Sport Canada, took it and did something with it, which is refreshing. Sorry, they did put through out a Red Deer declaration, and they are putting pressure on national sport organizations to say, if you want your money, which all flows down to all levels of sport, then you need to make sure that you're putting safeguards in place to protect everyone who's participating in sport and sport itself in Canada, and of course that all rolls down and goes out internationally too. So pressure has been put on the national sport organizations, in our case RCA, to ensure that they have little things that are happening at all of the clubs, that all of that is consistently applied across the country, and that everyone has the ability to address all aspects of safe sport. And I want to talk for a minute about, when you hear safe sport, kind of what pops to mind for most people often is, the really headline grabbing, what I would consider black and white, or in this case, red light. We know it's wrong. It's not the majority. The 99% of what happens in sport does not fit under that category. It's the red light, and we all know it's wrong and bad. And so why do we even need to talk about it? Because it seems so simple. But what I really want to talk today about is more the yellow light, the items that maybe we don't think about quite so much, that maybe we take for granted, or just kind of do in our day-to-day without necessarily realizing that those are yellow lights, and they're edging a little close to what could be red lights. And maybe they're not so blatant, and maybe they're not so glaring, but there's things there that when you sit back and really think about, maybe they're not quite as solid green as we originally like to think they are, for a lot of reasons. Times have changed, so how people perceive things have changed. The environment we're in, just how technology comes into play. There's so many different factors that could make some of these items that we used to not really think about. Now we really have to proceed with caution. When you drive, you make split-second decisions that really are life and death every time you come to a yellow light. Do you gun it? Sorry. Do you, proceed with caution? Do you stop because you have plenty of time? Those are all judgment calls you make literally in a split second. And the more you drive and the more you're used to it, it's easier. But definitely it's a learned skill. And it is a judgment in the moment. And some of that is what we're going to talk about today. We're really focusing, this is not a black and white, do A, not B kind of easy topic. There's a lot in the yellow area. And so we're going to try to explore that and hopefully open up your thinking. And in that, some of these conversations may push you a little outside your comfort zone. That's okay. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I think, Lisa, you're totally right. This is a good analogy to kind of help conceptualize what we're going to be talking about today. The red light stuff's obvious, and it should be obvious. And the yellow is, it's the day-to-day environment that we're living in as a coach. And we're talking about it as a bit more of a safe sport context, but these yellow light decisions are something we frequently encounter as coaches, right? This is the example of is it a little bit too foggy? Is it foggy enough? Can we still go out? It's these gray zones that aren't obvious, right? The days that we go on the water and it's a hurricane, yeah, we just go on the erg that day. It's everyday stuff that'll really impact us. That builds up to really big things overall.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes coaching a profession, is because you are required to make split-second decisions and judgment calls, and it's going to be about that judgment. So hopefully, we'll maybe get you to just think a little bit or consider some different things as you're making those calls in the future, or maybe give you tools and tricks to consider or to help other coaches with as we go. So the fun stuff or not so fun stuff that I get to do to kind of set the tone and just help with some understanding about some of the terms that are associated with safe sport. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. I can feel your eyes rolling. But I want you to understand kind of some of the key pieces of some of the definitions. You do have these notes. I'm not going to read them. You can listen, pick up some keywords as we go through. I've got about 4 slides that look like this, so don't panic. It's not the next hour. So maltreatment, first of all, is kind of the overarching, really broad word that encompasses pretty much all the actions that fall under safe sport. It really is an act that results in harm or has the potential for either physical or psychological harm to someone. So I think that that's a key piece, is that there's a potential for harm, and not necessarily just physical harm, but psychological harm too. So, what does that look like? What does that mean? Again, the sexual piece is probably an easy red light for in most situations. Physical contact, it's a little bit easier as well. Non-contact physical maltreatment, could be anything from allowing them to come back early from an injury, forcing them to be isolated, providing alcohol to a minor. These are some of the examples that fit into that. It's not contact, but it's still physical maltreatment for the vulnerable person, for the athlete. And then in terms of psychological, there's verbal, negative comments, criticisms. And then there's what we would call non-assaultive physical, which basically means it's a physical behavior that doesn't actually involve contact with the other person. You're throwing something, breaking something, punching a wall, that kind of behavior. That falls under maltreatment, psychological maltreatment. The next topic is neglect. And there definitely is some overlap with some of these examples. They could be considered one or the other. I mean, at the end of the day, does it specifically matter if something's categorized as neglect or maltreatment? No, if it's wrong, it's wrong. Well, not overly concerned, but just to get an idea of what some of the terms are. Neglect is often a pattern, but it could be one really serious incident where the needs of the person haven't been met. And part of the key here is that it's not about the intent of the actions. It's really about how the person's perceived it. So the key here is it's not about, oh, I didn't mean to ignore that person, or I didn't mean to push them too fast. It's about how that person felt in that behavior and what their perception was. So, not considering perhaps an athlete's needs, not considering complete supervision, allowing people to break the rules. Way back in my earlier life, I was a lifeguard, and one of the examples of that is if you let people run on the pool deck, it's wrong, it could potentially result in harm. That's basically neglect, because you're allowing them to do behavior that really is dangerous, or you're allowing something to happen that isn't really in their best interest, and it could be how they perceive their best interest.
Yeah, and I think a common one that kind of comes up, in a racing competitive context, an athlete, has a bit of a shoulder injury or rib injury, whatever it is, going into a race, and maybe it's a little bit sore, and do they come back? You need for this boat, points are on the line, crewmates are on the line. And as a coach, you wouldn't want to necessarily put them in harm, but you have to respect, their perception. If you repeatedly ask the question, 10 times, can you go back in? Can you go back in and do that, half little look? You have to respect what the athlete's perceiving, and are you putting in the athlete in a tough position?
And I get this. Most of you probably know, and I do a lot of work with regards to concussions and kind of uncovering that. And this is a big piece of that, because we know the long-term consequences, specifically of concussions, but of many injuries, if they do, if you suspect it and don't pull them out, it really is, could be causing a long-term issue for that athlete. So that's definitely part of what we're seeing in the return to rowing protocols. So some quicker just terms and words that are involved in terms of safe sport. In safe sport and in many, with the harassment complaint process, there's a process to follow. And if an individual is seen as kind of manipulating or interfering with that, that would also be considered an act kind of against safe sport and an act that could get an individual into sanctions because of their behavior. Same with retaliation. We want to encourage everyone to be confident in sharing, if you have a concern, bring it forward. And so if as someone taking adverse action against someone who's made a report in good faith, that also is an act or activity that will not be tolerated. Aiding and abetting. So if someone is suspended, an athlete, for example, gets suspended or sanctioned, and a coach is then helping with, advice, feedback, that's considered you're aiding a suspended athlete. They've been suspended for a reason. We need to respect the process. And failure to report. In some cases, you have a legal obligation to report if you have concerns. In other cases, it's just in the best interest of the athletes and the clubs and other coaches that you share your concerns. And all of those are things that, as safe sport moves forward, that could be causing negative impacts for yourself, for the club, for your athletes. So just kind of need to understand what those terms mean and what it means or could mean potentially in a safe sport context. And the last one I kind of wanted to highlight is harassment. We hear this a lot. And I know in Ontario, we have workplace harassment, but we also have harassment for athletes and participants. And it doesn't necessarily just involve workplace. It's a pretty wide scoped, but it is a comment or comments or conduct against an individual or group, which is unwelcome, or a reasonable person would think it was unwelcome. So you can't say, well, I didn't know they didn't want me to call them XYZ. It's, a reasonable person would say, and that's really not how you should be talking to other people, or unwelcome remarks about other people that, and the laws like the word reasonable a lot, but what is reasonable that's a welcomed or enjoyable conversation. Practical jokes or that hazing concept that could cause harm or negatively hurt someone. And again, it's about how the athlete actually feels or the individual that's the recipient, not necessarily the intention behind it. Practical jokes usually aren't intended to do damage, but sometimes they do. Deliberately excluding or socially isolating someone could also be seen as a harassment. So I promise not a ton of terminology perhaps, but there is one other term and concept I kind of want to talk about, just because I think it's often misunderstood, and I think it's a part that maybe happens a little more with the red light area, but definitely is something that we hear about and experience sometimes or see, and it's called grooming. And I put gatekeepers up there as well, because gatekeepers are really the people that protect the vulnerable individuals, whether that's parents, coaches, club admin, it's other people that kind of pay attention. So often you as a coach are a gatekeeper to your athletes. But what grooming is it's really a process that's often very slow and gradual, and it's normalizing contact. So you're normalizing a relationship between usually an adult and a minor, but could be between an athlete and a coach, or an athlete and a club admin, a person in a position of power, and they start to develop a relationship that looks okay, but you start to have that feeling that seems odd that they're that close. So what would look like inappropriate conduct, because it's been just such a slow, gradual process of building that relationship and the comfort, it starts to kind of be seen as a normal relationship and a normal process. In many cases that have gone in front of the courts, you've seen athletes at the coach's house or hanging out with a club admin at their house all the time, and that becomes kind of the norm. Everyone hangs out there. It's kind of the place to be. But it's starting the process of what's called grooming to build that relationship of trust. So favoritism, extra times, maybe gifts for an individual, it kind of appears innocent, but there's also that kind of, there's no official term, but I would call it that yucky feeling of like, yeah, I don't think that's quite right. And it builds through private communication, social media. Unfortunately, with the technology age that we're all in, it opens up a lot more opportunities for that relationship to build in that way. And you start to see things like private time together, meetings, and that's becoming, they're grooming to build a relationship. What often happens with this is they're not only grooming the athlete to think that that relationship's normal, but they're grooming the people around, whether it's, in a rowing scenario, it would be other people at the club admins, other coaches, perhaps even other parents, to kind of say, yeah, that's normal, and not to raise any red flags. And this is an important piece. And I know last year I had the opportunity to listen to Alison Forsyth, who is really the spokesperson now for Athletes Canada, talk about her experience. And this was a big piece of it that people around didn't notice and didn't see, and she didn't notice as a young teenager, and that because the gatekeepers in her life were also groomed in the same way. And really that as people who are committed to sport as a whole need to kind of be aware of this as we're, just going about not even your own role in your own sport, but just out there, and to be conscious of this kind of behavior and keep paying attention.
Yeah, so grooming and gatekeeping, it's an important one to view as a coach. We do have to understand that we do have an important role where, like Lisa said, a lot of things when it comes to grooming, it's kind of like boiling a frog, right? Like it's as the analogy of it slowly happens, and you do have to be very aware of it as we get out there. So it's not always easy in a rowing context. We can identify some red flags, in our red zone kind of analogies. A coach that is looking to offer private coaching in their basement, and say that don't tell anybody because it's special. Obviously, like that's a bad red flag. But usually it doesn't start out with that, right? It's the little things, and and there's the obvious thing, see something, say something, and this one's seems obvious, but it's difficult in our rowing community. We'll obviously say something in a red zone or red light, but when we're looking at the yellow light things, these conversations are pretty awkward, right? You have to you're dealing with your friends, you're dealing with in a club scenario, you might be dealing with a board member that controls equipment, whatever it is, and it might hold you back into saying something. So we have to identify that it is a lot more challenging than that you might obviously think, and you have to respect people when they do come forward and take things seriously. And this is where we do have to trust our gut and make sure we speak up when it's time. So we can move to the next slide, so we can start talking about
and there was a question, not to, there was a quick question just about like, what can we do with the gatekeeper so they're not groomed? But I think a big part of that, and a big part of this whole hour we have, is about education and awareness, because we go about our daily lives and don't necessarily think about it. So that's part of why we're having the conversation, and why we did spend a few minutes on grooming and gatekeepers, is because we want you to just be, by being aware of it and being conscious about it. I think we can all play a role just in keeping our eyes open as we go about our daily life, both at rowing and other pieces. I have kids in sports and stuff like that, so just just I think that's the biggest key, is to try to just all of us kind of build that awareness about it, and about all aspects of what we're talking about tonight, to help improve the overall landscape.
Mhm.
Uh,
So some of the safeguards we have in place, a big part of safe sport is this rule of two, and this is a pretty simple way of exempling what this means. There's the obvious, don't have private conversations with athletes, right? And and unfortunately, a lot of rowing, worlds that we're in a club, it's one coach with the athletes. Usually it's not one athlete, usually it's 10 or 20, because we're stretched pretty thin. But we need to look at incorporating more people, or more coaches in the mix, just to have more safeguards in place, right, to prevent this the grooming component. Be able to provide safeguards of inappropriate behavior or of dangerous behavior, and we can work our way up the scale, right? Obviously, we're looking at a gold standard of 2 certified screen coaches, involved with athletes at all times. But maybe it's not possible, but we want to strive towards that, right? And incorporate parents into the mix, screen parents into the mix, and things like that. So
yeah, I think the point with this is not to kind of say, oh, we can't do the gold standard, so we're not going to worry about it, but really to say, okay, where can we do, and we're going to aim as high as we can, as often as we can, but also recognize that to have 1 coach and 2 athletes is better than 1 coach, 1 athlete. To have 2 adults is better than, right? So just, we're aiming to be a step higher than we maybe are right now in what we're doing, and that's okay. We're trying to kind of build the culture of the club and build the activities so that it's aiming towards there, but not beating up on ourselves if we're not hitting the gold standard. And we're thinking there's only right and wrong. There's actually, and funny, there's the yellow area here too, right, where it's getting better, and we're going to go for that. So
yeah. So how do we make the rule of 2 work, right? It's the simple, like common example of just athletes being left alone early, or left alone at pickup whenever it is, and it's a situation you want to avoid, and the way you do that is through communication ahead of time. Make sure that parents are aware of what's going on, and this kind of ties into the culture of decision making and communication that will apply to the daily environment. It's making sure that all parents are CC'd, right? It's on communication, and know that you plan for situations. Say a parent's late and can't pick up, you communicate with parents ahead of time that a parent stays with you until that athlete gets picked up, and different things to help stop a situation before it happens. That's where the culture of safe sport really matters. It's preventing a lot of these situations from happening in the first place. So another part of safe sport environment is making sure when you're meeting with athletes, we're doing this in a safe space, right? This is the example of making sure you're not meeting with the athletes and lurking in the shadows, literally and metaphorically. If you're meeting in a compound, like at the boathouse, every rowing club has a space between the boathouse and the docks, in a quiet corner. Make sure you're having a meeting with another coach there, so it's visible. And and metaphorically, don't make sure you're having open communication, digitally. the reality is we're looking at digital training, virtual training for quite some time. We need to apply these concepts to the virtual meeting space. Make sure that parents and other coaches are included in the meeting, virtual meeting rooms. They can join in as and it's important, so
I think just to answer a kind of question and just maybe
yeah.
Some people
Sorry, I'll look at the questions. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions about in the coach boat situation. So you're on a coach boat, and of course, like you're in a coach boat by yourself on the water with you've got maybe a quad or an 8 or whatever, doesn't matter. Some athletes out there in whatever boat situation. Do you need 2 coaches in every coach boat? I mean, I think being on the water is open and observable, and while you're not people can't necessarily hear every word you're saying and your tone and all of those pieces. If you have more than one athlete, so you have a quad, for example, then it is giving you that kind of rule of 2 piece. Again, not the gold standard necessarily. So yeah, I guess the gold standard would be 2 screen coach and certified coaches in a coach boat. But this is where the reality of how does it work in everything we do when you're out on the water. You may be in a coach boat with your crew on one end or one side of a body of water, depending on what your body of water looks like, and another coach may be out with another group. Would I suggest you do that with just an athlete in a single? No, because then that's the one coach, one athlete. So it is open and observable, but no one can really hear you. It may happen occasionally, but ideally that's looking for a group of athletes to go out, not necessarily a group of coaches, but
and I think with the 2 coaches, open and observable is part of it, and kind of have to look at it from a layers of protection, standpoint. A big meme that went around with COVID was the Swiss cheese analogy, right? There's holes in protection. You need masks and distancing. And it's the same kind of idea with safe sport, principles. There not one protection is perfect. There's going to be a gap, and that's why it's so important to have multi layers of protection, multi layers of communication. So when a gap does arise, it can get filled by another policy or concept or cultural support to help prevent something bad from happening.
Ready for the next slide?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is where communication with parents is very important. When we're looking at dealing with youth, it's you're all on the same team in the sense of you're supporting the athlete to make it better, make them better, and this is where making sure it's a clear form of communication. And to be honest, a lot of parents with new joining the mix are pretty comfortable with safe sport principles already. Like a lot of our fundamental LTAD stage athletes have been a part of safe sport at a younger age, so these concepts aren't new to them, right? And having this communication, and putting these rules in place really help as a coach to reference at a quick standpoint, so you don't get put in a tough situation. And you're not alone when it comes to applying safe sport principles to the environment. There's the support from your club. Our CA's working very hard with more documentations. We're Ontario, and I really can't think of too many people that are against helping out with safe sport. Like this is a big movement, and everyone's pretty supportive when it comes to it.
Yeah, I think the communication piece to the parents is really key, because it really is your support, so that in the example you gave of a parent's late to pick up and you need to ask another parent to stay, if the first time they're learning about this is when you're asking them, it may be awkward. It's a little more awkward for you. It's a little more awkward for them. If you can do some of that so they understand what you're asking, they understand the position. And that goes with communication with the athletes throughout the season in terms of, this is the method that we're going to use to communicate. And it needs to meet certain requirements. As I communicate with the athletes, I don't want the 16-year-old athlete texting me. That's, we're keeping things in a group environment. We're not going to ensure that there's not like one-to-one communication. So if parents understand that ahead of time, they're not going to, or hopefully they're not going to ask you to do things that push you outside of that and put you in a position where you have to say no and it becomes awkward. So hopefully just kind of laying the groundwork. And nothing's, there's no one answer here, but these are some ideas to help put you in a position where you're a little bit stronger footing, and to work with your club, like Ian said, to help move those through. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think with communication, like this will help with pre-established boundaries, right? This is a good thing for a coach. It's exhausting when you get a phone call on a Sunday night, whatever it is. That it from a parent or an athlete, but with safeguards in place, it's like, no, the only way we're communicating is through email. It'll be much easier. And we know that we have everybody has a role to play in this, right? It's our rowing community is a lot like is an ecosystem, right? It's we're every little bit is supporting each other to make it a much better place. And safe sport is a set of rules to help allow this ecosystem to kind of thrive and really become a great place to be. So safe sport from a coach's perspective, we have a huge role to play. Like we coaches are the people that have the greatest impact on daily culture in our environment. They're athletes and look up towards us. We're the ones with the technical knowledge, and not only athletes looking up, but other volunteers, other parents. A lot of people really take note of what coaches are doing, and to have coaches buy into a policy or into a common set of principles will have such a much more impactful buy-in from the organization or the community. So that's why it's one of the reasons why it's so important for coaches to really be bought in on this. And it's from a risk reduction standpoint, safeguards are good for everybody. It's going to help us. It's going to stop anybody from getting put in a position they don't want to be in before it happens, which is huge. And good established boundaries to reference. Nobody. One of the hardest parts about being coaches is saying no and have it perceived that you're just being mean and targeted towards someone, when reality it's not your intent, but it's being perceived. And making sure that there's rules to reference to help educate people will make things so much smoother. And safe sport will make a coach's life better. It's not meant to be viewed as a burden. It's meant to be something that's embraced and will help coaches thrive and all athletes thrive for sure. So just before we get into our summary slide, getting a couple questions about like who's the audience that we're talking about. And so when you look at the athletes, are we just talking about officially legally minors, which in Ontario is 18, different provinces of different ages? No, we're not. We're talking about really anyone who is considered vulnerable. We're also talking about situations where there's a power imbalance. So as a coach, as a leader, in a work environment where I have a boss, technically there's a power imbalance there because they have power over me. And I know we deal a lot with that kind of university age, which would make some of these more complicated. There may not be a parent around.
But I can tell you as a parent of a 20-year-old, she's an adult, but still I would definitely see that there would be a higher level of risk for her as a vulnerable person. She's young, she's going to want to please the coach, all of those pieces. So I think definitely as you look, this is all athletes, because as a coach, you're in a power position, and it's an imbalance. Is it that much more important with minors or young people to do as much as you can? And there's a lot of different pieces you can put in, and some of them are going to be harder in a university environment when mom and dad aren't there to sit in the room when you have that virtual meeting. So maybe you need to look at, and I know with COVID, we're really, it's hard right now, but that you're meeting with them in a room that makes sense on your end. So, there's not a bed in the background, that they're in an open area and maybe their home, so that that there's other people around, you can record it. I think regardless of the age of the athlete you're dealing with, you still need to make steps to create a safe sport culture for the participants, because there is still a risk beyond just officially minors. The day they turn 18 doesn't mean that they're no longer at risk, and they can no longer interpret some of the actions in a way that would put you as coach at risk of anything, or create a situation that once they're 18 they don't all of a sudden not care about harassing type comments and all of those. I think regardless of the age of the athletes, even adults, they're still vulnerable to the power imbalance with a coach. So definitely, there's a couple questions here about university age and kind of young adults in that age range. So definitely, I wouldn't look at they've turned 18, I don't need to do these extra pieces. Still do. You may need to get a little more creative or work through it, but I think that's in the best interest, and kind of back to that rule of 2 chart, may not be gold standard as they are in the 19-20 range, but you're still going to put a few safeguards in place for everybody's protection.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to do this kind of, our intent is to kind of just wrap up some of the key points. And then we do have several questions, which I love, and just some statements in agreement, which I also love, and, kind of open it up. So if you are thinking about a question now would be a great time to throw it up there. But really some takeaways is, acting in the athlete's best interest is really the key. It is about their perception, not your intent. So I worked in the fitness field for a long time. Fitness, some people go, I need a personal trainer who's going to yell at me. But other people might view that as not appropriate. So it's really, every individual takes things differently, and it's about how they're perceiving your actions. At the end of the day, it's about respecting each other and each other's differences and making our efforts to do our best. We've talked a lot tonight about kind of that step process, working our way up towards the gold standard, making the little decisions that will keep everyone a little bit safe, and we're protecting the athletes, the coaches, the clubs, the sport of rowing, and sport on a bigger piece. And a lot of it's about prevention. We're just trying to set up systems so that at the end of the day, we've done what we can. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think prevention's a big part of this, right? It's it's stopping things before they get under control, and that's where the cultural component of safe sport is so important. We want to stop behavior before it escalates. We don't want things to develop to a red light scenario. We don't want to go into a situation where we lose. Sorry guys, I think I lost my headphones there.
You good? Or maybe I'll just start answering questions and then you can.
Thanks, Lisa.
Well, you figure out your audio visual. We made it 45 minutes without an audio issue.
Yeah.
There was a couple of questions earlier on about, because we talked in some of my examples about if you're having an athlete come back from injury too soon, and how is that, what's the coach's responsibility there if they're They're saying, no, either saying, no, I'm good, or like, I'm good enough. Really it's about long-term. We should be acting in the athlete's best interest. It is in the long-term health of the athlete. We deal with this a lot with some of my work that I've done with related to concussions. It's about the long-term goal, not the short-term goal. And the athlete, they're going to want to compete. Of course they are. That's why they're there, because they want to compete, because they want to do well. But sometimes we have to make decisions that we know are in the best interest of other people, to say, yeah, I think this weekend you need to sit out so that you'll be able to compete for the rest of the season. And that's, it's never a fun conversation, but it's in the reality of what's in the athlete's best interest, and what's their, what's the long-term health. And I think that's part of, as we look to kind of look at what our code of conducts are, and really the athletes need to take some responsibility for ensuring that they're being open around what their injuries are. You don't want all the medical detail, but are they really ready? What's their doctor say? Where are they at in their recovery? So that we can make sure we're making those decisions in the best interest long-term, because that responsibility does fall on you as well. So there's just some comments I'm going to read about should become part of club culture. And I think that that's part of what we're trying to do, is just build awareness, and part of what Ian's been mentioning. So hopefully that support of that. It's a process though, because it's not black and white, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I can't, walk into a club and put a stack of paper on the ground and say, oh, look, now you have safe sport. It is a culture, and it will take some time. So hopefully these are steps towards that.
Yeah, there's steps towards it, and when making cultural change, sometimes it involves some awkward conversations, right? And embrace it. We want to make these small changes that will lead to big changes ultimately. But then,
for sure. There's a question about apps and communication, and around an app which I've actually never heard of, Huddy. Which you can share video and feedback with the athletes, but it's unmonitored. And I think Ian may have a couple suggestions, but really, and that's part of that communication pre-season to the parents and to the athletes, to say, these are what we're using for communication. Here's the standard. We're using a format where we can record it. We'll have a copy of it. So email does that. Can you create create some channels that work for you, communicate to your athletes? But I think that, you can't have unmonitored communication. One of the teams I work with is using Slack, because that keeps it, that tracks it, everything goes into there. I don't know if you have examples, Ian.
Yeah, I think with communication, there's going to be situations where we have to share videos. We're going to have to have quick communication. But we've got to apply the concept of rule of two, and just make sure everybody's looped in. It's what if your preferred communications WhatsApp. Just make sure everybody's looped in. I think that's fine. But when you're choosing an app, there's also a sense of space to it as well, right? Don't use an application to communicate with athletes where you're still posting, a picture of you on a patio with a caption 5 o'clock somewhere. It's just like there's a sense of space with conversations. There's a sense of space with the platforms that you're using, and make sure you're respecting that and keeping things professional when working with athletes of any age.
Yeah, and WhatsApp unfortunately doesn't really allow you to track it as well, hold those things as well. So, really, I think choose carefully. You may have one or two, but try to look for a communication method that is easy for the parents to access and the kids to access, that allows for that group. So everything's always out in the open. There's no kind of, just to this one athlete, that we're shutting down that opportunity, so that, because what happens is that the kids just, I'm going to just text my coach to tell them I'm going to be late. And it becomes this, they forget to loop mom and dad into that communication, whatever. So we want to make sure that it is from the start kind of set up so that, it's all eyes can be on it. There's nothing that looks like it's going to be secret, I guess, is the challenge. So, there's lots of options out there. I know Slack's worked fairly well for, like I said, some of the teams I've been working with, but email's also a good group chat. I mean, sometimes you get into this, are we kept tracking it? How do you track that thing? So just look after, I mean, like anything, there's lots of different options. Everything's got its pros and cons. They all fall different places on the steps. Look for what you can make work for you. Question about a legal perspective around a coach has to prove innocence if being falsely accused. In the age of Me Too, a coach has to prove innocence if being falsely accused. Guilty until proven innocent. I think part of that is putting processes in place. So, part of what we're doing, and I spoke about protection, and because it's protection of the athletes, it's protection of the coach and the club. I mean, some of the pieces that we're doing is for the protection of the coaches, 100%. And that is because there is a certain vulnerability to that. We're trying not to really look at it from that negative aspect, but I believe I think it's there. But I think part of that is having documented ahead of time, ensuring that you're doing your best, right? It's about making those steps in the right spot. I just want to mention that RCA is putting together a very large document with some policies and processes to help work through some of those systems, so that if there is a concern, that there's a method for it to get raised, and there is third-party opportunities. So if you wanted to report anything, there's a third-party line on the RCA website, so you can report. There's some processes and abilities for you to report anything, and there's a process with a third party who will evaluate, who will work through the process, and a process that's fair to everyone, confidential, all of those pieces, so that there's stuff getting put into play to protect everyone at that, if there happens to be an accusation as well. Sorry.
Yeah, it's about putting protections in place so that situation can't happen. You can't go back in time, but you can. It's about prevention, right? It's putting so many safeguards in place that those types of situations are very unlikely to happen.
So there's a question about it says there's people get drawn into groups of young people. Lots of groups are having big issues, but they're drawn in for the purposes of abusing young people. And obviously, we agree the vast majority of people don't come into coaching with that intent. And that's the yellow that we kind of set out to talk about. But we know abuse is happening in amateur sport, and that CBC investigation did recognize 36 different sports. The question is, what are the avenues that draw otherwise well-intentioned coaches into the abuse category? And I'm not sure so I'm not 100% sure if you're asking for examples of where yellow becomes red. I think, and I won't go back to them right now, but when you look at the slides after, you can see some of those examples around harassment and maltreatment, unwelcome comments, things like that those items kind of take yellow to red. I think the other piece that I really wanted to mention, though, is that I think what happens is if sports look like they're not doing some of these culture, prevention, communication pieces, then it looks like it's an easy sport to kind of get into if they're not well-intentioned. So I think by having a culture that is protecting everyone, and with systems and really a culture where we put safety and of all areas of safety first, then it's helping to keep our sport safe from anyone who's maybe not well-intentioned. So hopefully I answered that question. Lisa, is that for national team athletes only? I believe, I'm assuming that question is about the RCA work, and that's for that'll be rolled out to everyone, and the third party is for everyone. So on the RCA website, the third party number is for anyone who has a concern, who doesn't want to go through, doesn't feel comfortable that they have an avenue in their own your own club. If that's not what you were asking, please clarify. What's the process if an athlete wants to share personal information? Good question. So health, financial, family. I mean, often you have a relationship as a coach, right? They might tell you things. And I think it's at the point where if they say something where they're in harm or they're in a position, then you're going to need to report it. But otherwise, I think, that's going to be that judgment call of, I'm going to tell you I had spaghetti for dinner. That's obviously fine. And they may be telling you, hey, parents are going through divorce. Things are a little rough at home. They may be looking for support. I think it's it's that ongoing judgment call when you have to go, have you talked to like hook them up with people on the team, make sure it's in a group setting, some of those pieces.
Yeah, and I think, it's okay to support, right? Like I don't think safe sport, needs to turn everybody into robots, but but make sure that you're using those judgment calls, and if the conversation evolves and you need to bring somebody else in, right? As things change, just use a good sense of judgment, right?
A couple of questions, just comments on communication. People are sharing some ideas. You can create a team on the huddle and share with athletes and parents, or Facebook groups for each part of a team. Sharing videos through the Facebook group is easy. So there's some suggestions for people that we're looking for those. I have a question about, so we're a small club, hire students to open and close in the summer. They're the first person at the club, and if the weather's not great, there may only be one other rower arriving at the start. So do we need to pay for 2 students? It's a good question, and I'm happy to chat with you offline later because it is pretty technical. But I think it's not that unusual to have one coach show up for an early morning. Some of this, my answer may depend. Well, what's the age group? Is it a set group? Is it drop in? And I think you could sell this to your group to say, well, if only one person shows up, then they don't get to row. So bring a friend, bring a depending on if this is an adult drop-in, that they're just there to open the club. But you're also, in many cases, you may be putting the student at risk if it is just an adult and you've got a young student and, perhaps an older adult coming down, you're putting them at risk too from a workplace harassment perspective. So I think anytime you have a situation where you might have one person alone with one other person, there's always a risk for something inappropriate to happen. How big of a risk may depend on a variety of factors, but I think, it goes back to Ian's example of open, observable, and there's some factors. So situations like that are hard because, not getting all the details in the question here, but it really is a judgment on where's the line and what can you do. Obviously the club doesn't want to pay for it to have 2 students to open the club. That's not fiscally fun. But what can you do in terms of making sure that, the tone is set, that it's not just one rower coming down, or that if the weather's really bad, then you're not opening because it's not worth it for one rower.
Yeah. So I guess, parents can be challenging, right? It's with, as far as some things, and that's where some safeguards are in place, with good policy that you can reference if you're dealing with more difficult parents. Safe sport's there to help protect the coach as well. Right?
And I think it's there to protect the sport, to protect everything. Andrews, come on, that means we're, there's a couple of questions I'm just not 100% sure what the person's referring to. There's a couple of items about just that the more we talk about this, the easier it's going to become. And I think people are historically, this is not deemed as a fun topic that people really want to sit down and spend a lot of time chatting with. Although it's been interesting in the last month, as Ian and I have met a few times, unfortunately virtually, to talk about this. Our conversations have gone on because we bring out different things, and I think hopefully tonight, we've maybe highlighted some stuff, maybe some of the examples that I gave earlier, the perspective that it's the athlete's perception, not, your intent or the recipient's perception. And it's widespread. It could be another coach at a regatta, not even in your own club. Just as a sport, as a group of people who care about rowing, we want to try to do our best to make sure that we're protecting all of the athletes, regardless of their age, regardless of where they're at. And we're just going to try to do our best to keep moving it forward step by step. And I look forward to more conversations about safe sport. Like I said, RCA is going to be in the next year or so bringing in a lot of tools to support with process and things like that. So I know this is the start of many conversations that we'll be having, and I think that's good because there was a few comments about how this is building awareness, this is building pieces. So I look forward to all of those conversations. And I know I didn't actually get to the end of my slides because we do a fun question slide, but I think it's that whole what's the yellow, and is this a yellow that I should hit the brakes on or proceed with caution, or ram through the intersection? Obviously, usually not a good choice, but and we will. Andrea said that this is going to be recordings going to be shared. If there's questions we didn't get to, or people had questions that I perhaps didn't fully understand in the little box, I know as a participant sometimes it's hard to get what you're trying to get across in the little box. Definitely please, lisa@rowontario.ca. You're welcome to send me an email. If you want to talk to Ian, I can copy him in on it as well. And we can, I don't know I know his email, but not off the top of my head. And we can, make sure we're getting you some answers. So hopefully this has been helpful. Ian, I don't know if you have any closing words. Andrea's like dying to get on. But.
No, it's okay.
This is a conversation that's going to only become increasingly. It's already important. It's going to be increasingly important as we go forward. And safe sport's a topic that's can be front of mind for a long time. So let's embrace it. And it's going to be a collective effort, and it's going to be good for everyone.
Awesome. So I just want to thank you both, Lisa and Ian, for sharing your conversation with us tonight. And for me, that stoplight analogy really brings this topic home to a relatable level for me as a coach, but also as a parent and as a sport administrator. And as well, Ian, your emphasis on our, very unique and significant role as coaches. It really is a privilege. And so this is so important. So thank you to everyone for joining tonight. I hope that you all take this back to your own contexts and continue the conversation. And I hope to see everyone at tomorrow night's session with Dr. Volker Nolte and Michelle Darville on the updated RCA technique model. And again, if you need this presentation, it will be uploaded when the conference is done. Have a good night, everyone.